Welcome to Jane Jackson Careers, a podcast to inspire you to take your career to the next level. In this podcast, I chat with amazing professionals who are leaders in their field and find out what's made them a success. Many of them have successfully made changes in their careers. They may have changed industry, changed job function, made big city or country moves, or taken the huge leap into entrepreneurship. I also share practical and actionable career tips for those who want to explore what to do next in their career and aren't sure about what steps to take to get moving. Subscribe to this podcast for regular updates or visit me at janejacksoncoach.com.
Hey, this is John Lee Dumas introducing Jane Jackson Careers, a podcast that will inspire you to take control of your career and your life. Here's your host, Jane Jackson, career management coach and author of Navigating Career Crossroads. Be prepared to ignite.
Now today, I'm having a chat with Michele Gennoe, the Mindful Leadership Lady. Michele has worked in leadership roles for over 20 years as CEO, operations manager, program and project manager across the corporate, government and not-for-profit sectors as a trusted advisor and consultant for organisations including the Commonwealth Bank in Australia, the Department of Education and the Red Cross. She holds postgraduate qualifications in international management and a master's in spiritual science. Michele brings out the best in people and empowers others, often in complex and multicultural environments. Michele is a woman on a mission, and she's a really talented lady too, and a good friend of mine. She's passionate about helping leaders to be more mindful so they can live more meaningful, profitable and inspiring lives. Her latest book, Mindful Leadership, 7 Steps to Transforming Your Business and Your Life, is a culmination of her extensive work in the areas of leadership and personal development. I'm very lucky to have Michele on the show today. So welcome, Michele, and thanks for joining me on Jane Jackson Careers.
Thank you, Jane, and it's a real pleasure to be here today with you.
Yeah. Now, Michele, I'm really interested to find out about your career path and how you came to be the Mindful Leadership Lady. So can we start about your early days?
I think, like many people on a mission, if you like, or a purpose in their lives, you tend to take a fairly unconventional path. And my unconventional path has been very, very interesting and varied and different. And I've been very lucky to have been able to work not only here in a number of different states in Australia, but also overseas in a number of different countries.
And so where have you worked besides Australia?
I've worked in Europe, in London for a number of years, a couple of times, and also up north in Scotland. I've also worked in Los Angeles for a little while whilst I was living in an amazing part of town there. And I've also been very lucky and worked in Chile in South America.
Wow, you jet setter, Michele. That sounds fantastic. And so was this in the early days of your career or was it more recently?
This was in the more earlier days, probably in the mid part of my career. So the early part of my career was in Perth in Western Australia where I grew up, and then in Melbourne after that, and then overseas. I was overseas for a number of years before I came back and now live here in wonderful Sydney.
Oh, fantastic. So in the early years, like for example in Chile, what was happening in Chile for you?
Well, I actually went there because I decided that I'd wanted to experience living and working in another culture. And I went there and unfortunately Pinochet decided to go back at the same time. So it meant that things were a little bit unsettled in the country at the time. And so it led me down a path of trying a number of different options. And then I was very lucky. I worked as an English language teacher to some of the CEOs in organisations like Komatsu. So I got to experience some very high-level organisations and some of the people that work there, whilst also walking around and visiting many interesting parts of Santiago.
Wow. So you were teaching English to them at that time?
I was teaching them English and they were actually teaching me about Chilean culture and values.
So have you picked up some extra languages yourself?
Un poquito español, choto Japanese, so a little bit of Japanese, Mahaba in Turkish. I was very lucky as I travelled around the world and met some amazing people in these different places. I picked up lots of different bits of language, and like anywhere, if people recognise that if you're attempting to say at least hello or thank you, then, you know, that they're so much more grateful that you're trying to use their language while you're there.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, hola and well done,
Hola.
Michele.
Gracias.
Okay, so let's go back in time a little bit. And I want to know, the young Michele Gennoe, when you were 18 years old, what career were you dreaming about at that time?
Well, interestingly, Jane, I grew up in Perth in Western Australia, and even back then, the mining was such an important part of the community and the culture there. So when thinking back to what did I want to do when I was 18, I actually had it in my head that I wanted to run BHP.
Oh.
I just started a business degree, and my whole plan and ambition, my plan for world domination, if you like, was to run BHP.
Well, it's their loss that they don't have you now, Michele.
It is.
As a mindful leadership lady, the rest of the world is now benefiting. Okay, so at 18 you wanted to run BHP. Let's just fast forward a few years. So just 7 years later, when you're about 25, what were you up to then?
Well, that was interesting. When I turned 25, I was actually a few years further along my career, and I'd completed some postgraduate studies. And by that stage, I'd moved from planning to take over the world through BHP to something a bit calmer and a bit milder. I was working for an organisation called Woolmark, and I was working in their global headquarters in Melbourne. And I was involved with interior textiles, which was a very different, tangent to mining, obviously. But it was also much closer to what I'd started to develop in as a person then, where the product and the service that we were offering was actually a very lovely and nurturing product of wool. So I'd kind of gone from the hard-nosed edge, even within that 7 years of mining, to wanting to actually start to believe in the products and services. So working at the global headquarters of Woolmark in Melbourne meant that I was able to work with something that was dear to my heart, supporting the Australian farmers, but also was producing a service and a product that was actually something that we could do globally on behalf of Australia.
And Australian wool is great quality and wonderful, so it's always good to support Australian businesses too. So how did you get into textiles?
Well, in a similar way to my mining qualifications, which was I didn't have any qualifications. I think I've been very lucky in that I've always been a very outgoing and happy person, and by having that kind of can-do approach, I've been able to then walk in, and even without any technical knowledge or background, I've then been able to pick up things and quickly understand what needed to be done.
So this sounds like the start of quite an eclectic career. And fast forward a few more years to where you are today, and as the mindful leadership lady, how did you get from dreaming about running BHP to being in textiles and promoting, Aussie wool, to being the mindful leadership lady and the successful coach that you are today? What happened? What happened between 25 and now?
Well, I guess the common theme was that each of these organisations, even when I was 18 through to 25 through to now, every business and every individual that I've worked with has been going through some sort of profound change and transformation. So this path, and it did take me a few years to see the common thread, but once I understood what the common thread was, it was this change and transformation that organisations and people had started to go through. So unlike my father and that older generation where you took on a job and then you were there for life pretty much till you died, by the time I entered the workforce, everything was in a constant change of flux. They were restructuring every 10 seconds, selling off part and buying parts of the organisation. And this continuous change and continuous development actually had quite a profound impact on the people working in that organisation and on myself at the time as well. So this theme meant that in my private life, I was also doing quite a number of personal development courses here and overseas and in different countries. And those two streams then became the two threads of my life, where I was contemplating and doing personal development courses at the same time that I was working in organisations and with individuals going through quite profound change.
It's really interesting because I'm as you know, I'm a career management coach, and so many people that I'm working with now are going through a redundancy, and many who've been with the company quite a long time, they too thought that once they got into a role, especially in a large organisation, it was almost like a job for life. And many people in the past used to feel that way. But then now, because, mergers and restructures and the global financial crisis and everything has made, just organizational restructure and downsizing such commonplace activity and so many redundancies happening, everyone's realized that they really need to reinvent themselves. And it sounds like what you've been doing with continuing your personal development, building your skills, opening up additional options has been a really eye-opener for you, and it's created a new career path for you, hasn't it?
Yes, and that initial start in life where moving countries, moving jobs, it actually, and like you were asking, how did I get into textiles from mining? That continuous reinvention of myself has been something that I then realised later on was a theme that I was able to do, because I hadn't, in some survival mechanism in me hadn't kind of brought into this idea that I would be at the organisation for a long period of time. And in living in different places and working with different organisations, it was very similar to when I was travelling and you would meet new people and need to form new friendships and new dynamics.
Now, what do you think about this, where you need to you need to dance in the moment and be very flexible and adaptable to change, because obviously change is the only constant now, and you must have gone through quite a lot of change. Have you found all of the experiences that you've had so far have helped you to become a more effective, mindful leadership coach?
Very much so. I think we are sum totals of our experiences to date. And by having worked with people on many different cultures and many different sizes and styles of organisations, it allows me to have an amazing amount of empathy for people, for whatever aspect it is that they're having as maybe a challenge in their business or in their life, because I will have experienced something similar, whether it was reinventing myself, whether it was explaining to somebody, because it's only a recent phenomenon that my kind of eclectic background has become more acceptable. For many, many years, I would always be experiencing the kind of, why aren't you an expert having worked 20, 30 years in this area or that area? And like many people, you needed to have a long time of experience to get a job from doing the same thing over and over again before that. But for some reason, and this is my own path, I was always very lucky that I was able to move around even when it wasn't popular and it wasn't really the done thing.
Yeah. I think what it would have done is it's taught you actually how to be very, very adaptable to change. And I think in today's economic climate, and with all of the change that's constantly happening, anyone who doesn't adapt is going to get left behind. So now what I'm really interested in is, in your line of work, can you tell me about a typical day in the life of you as a mindful leadership coach?
Well, in a typical day, my actual day will probably start the night before the day. So the night before the day is actually when I sit down and recap and review on what I've done for that day and what I'm going to be doing the next day. So I do believe having certain habits is very important to be effective and to be utilising your time in the best way. So my actual day will start with the planning before that day, the night before. What I'll then do the next day is get up, review that list and prioritise, now that I've actually got a fresh eye of looking over the list, what I'm going to be doing for that day.
And then during the day, do you go into a corporate office? Do you have one-on-one coaching sessions, or do you have coaching sessions with teams? How does that work for you?
My days can be very varied because I'm consulting and coaching and facilitating. So from the consulting perspective, I may be working with organisations that are actually wanting to introduce more of these mindful elements and mindful tools and techniques to some sort of projects or change program that they're doing within their organisation. So they may have a traditional project manager, change manager, or even an organisational development manager, but they're actually still looking for, well, what are some of those behavioural elements that we can bring in that can help people manage and adapt to that change in a much more easier and flowful way. And in the coaching element, the coaching can be with individual staff or individual people, depending on whether it's around their businesses or around their personal lives. And then with the facilitation and the training, that's the form that normally takes is around workshops. So running training programs and workshops for organisations. So it's, again, empowering their staff, giving them the behavioural skills so they can be more adaptable and more flexible and more mindful about managing this change in their own lives.
This sounds like such a wonderful, wonderful job where you're really making a difference in other people's lives. What do you find personally the most rewarding about your role?
I guess the thing that motivates and inspires me the most is seeing people being more empowered in their lives. It's something that's very dear to my heart and very inspiring for me when I'm working with people and I can see that the lights have kind of gone off in their minds and in their eyes about, okay, if I do this, this and this in my life, then all these different aspects will change. And they suddenly feel, instead of stuck and unable to get out of the overwhelm or the anxiety or the just confusion with the number of things to do, you can see that they suddenly are much clearer about who they are, what they want to do, and why they want to do it.
What's the most challenging aspect of your role then?
I think sometimes the challenging aspect of the role can actually be just the complexities, because we are in such a much more complex world now, and people, when they are overwhelmed and stressed, or organisations when they have so much going on and they're trying and struggling to survive, there is just so much complexity with those issues. And it can be, well, not difficult, but it can take a little bit of time to actually get through the emotional attachment to all of that drama around the complexity, to actually help calm that down enough to be able to identify out of all the things that are in front of you what is important and what's not important. Because when you're in that overwhelmed state, it just all feels important. It all feels overwhelming. And you have to calm those emotions down so that people are balanced enough to be able to start to take deep breaths and step back from all of those strong emotions that they're feeling.
You know, my next question to you was going to be, if you were to start all over again, what choices would you make? However, now from what you're telling me, you really need to have the maturity and the experience and the varied experience that you've had to be able to handle such situations where if someone is going through a challenging situation and a lot of change and how to cope, if you hadn't gone through, massive changes yourself in your career, it would be difficult to relate, wouldn't it? So, if you were to start all over again, would you change anything at all?
No, I wouldn't, Jane, and exactly for that reason, that all of the experiences and the jobs and the people have been, in a sense, the training ground for me to understand myself more. And in that deep way that I understand myself, I can then hold and empathise for others when I'm working with them. Mm-hmm. And similar to talking about when the light goes on for them, it's that empathy when they're in that dark place. I myself remember earlier on in my career when I'd come across people that were very emotional and very angry, and I used to take it personally. And I'd think, oh, I've done something wrong or I've disappointed them. And it was only after, being in the workforce for a few years that I realised it wasn't about me personally, but that person, that human being, that soul, was actually just in a lot of pain because they were scared. They had a family, they had friends, they had a life that they wanted to hold on to, and they were just scared. So they weren't lashing out at me. They were just angry and frustrated. And it was my role then to not react to it as being about me, understand that they were this person in pain, and then hold them and be with them until we could calm that energy and that emotion down, and then help them to work through that to actually solve the situation that they were in.
Yeah. I think as a coach, it's such an incredible feeling when you know that all you really need to do is to give people space to vent, to talk, to think, to cry, to laugh, just to get it all out, so that they realize that once that emotion that's been bottled up is out there, then you can start to rebuild those building blocks in a way in your life, so that you can choose a direction to move rather than feeling really, really stuck. And then having a calming influence like yourself there to listen and help them to put the pieces together again must be very, very comforting.
It is. And for many people, especially in today's age where with technology, there's so many ways of connecting with all of the different devices, but people have forgotten how to really connect. So coming across somebody like myself, or through the work that you do, where our training has been very much to be connecting with people and holding them as they're going through whatever it is that they're going through, that gift of being fully present with them and in being mindful that you're aware that you're being fully present with them is a connection that is very valuable for people nowadays, when they have 100 ways of connecting, but they actually, it's empty. They're not connecting with anybody in any of those ways at all.
Yeah, I think we're very connected when it comes to the technology side of things, but when it comes to the individuals, that eyeballing, the face-to-face, the feeling, just breathing, and even, just that whole ambiance of being with someone else, we seem to be losing it. What's quite funny is there was this a new method of connecting that I read. I think it's about a year old now, but it was called phone stacking, because too many people were having dinners with their friends and they were all checking their phones rather than talking to each other. And I think it was someone in Los Angeles who came up with the idea, who said, okay, everyone get your phones out and plonk them on the table, face down, and no one's to touch their phones at all during the course of the evening. We're going to talk to each other, and whoever can't stand it anymore and reaches for their phone first has to pay for dinner. And I think that's a very good idea, because you've got to get rid of the devices when you're with each other.
Oh, I think that's very true. And the other example I use for people is coffee withdrawals. So asking people to, not drink coffee for a few hours or even half a day. When people become so connected and addicted to certain patterns or behaviours, it can be very hard for them to even go without that behaviour for a couple of hours. And the phone stacking is a great example, and also mentioning to people about, cutting back on coffee and their addiction to something like that.
No, don't make me cut back on coffee.
No.
Done that. I had to cut back on coffee, and I started drinking tea, and it's tea with milk. And then I've got some very, very healthy friends. You're one of them, Michelle, who loves the tea, but I have to have my tea with milk as well. You've got to have a little bit of advice. I think just a little bit of advice advice. Okay, so now if someone wants to get into your line of business, being a coach, not necessarily a mindful leadership coach, but being a good coach, what advice would you give for someone exploring this as a direction?
Well, I think that the key to being a coach and being in that profession where your underlying thing is that you're being called to serve somebody. So my biggest advice for somebody would be to be creative and to look at what you do and what you've done in your life and to do more of that. So if you've identified, like I saw through the pattern of my life, that there was lots of change, lots of travel, lots of transformation. So I was able to then use that to build into this mindful leadership and be the mindful leadership lady. If you look at those common threads through your own lives and then be creative and combine all of those threads into a way that you can be a coach and you can be serving and working with the people that are out there for you. Because I do truly believe that there's different people that suit different people out there, and you can find that by being creative around what you're good at. You don't need to be me, you don't need to be Jane, you don't need to be anybody else. You just want to be the best that you're good at. And from doing that, you can then offer the world your best parts.
Now, I have to tell everyone that Michele has written a fantastic book called Mindful Leadership. And can you tell us just a little bit about your book, Michele?
Well, Jane, as I described earlier, in my life, I had those two themes running. One was very much the organisational and business transformation, and I'd also been doing quite a lot on the personal development side. So what I did for my book was I developed a 7-step leadership development program and wrote in my book those 7 steps. It describes the framework in a really beautiful, simple and easy to understand way around which I believe everybody, every leader and every person on the planet can actually transform their lives and become more mindful as to who they are as a leader in their lives. So this 7-step framework, I'm so excited about it. It's a culmination of over 20 years of working internationally and here in Australia. And I've also been very lucky to be able to interview some very prominent Australian business people in the book to help reinforce some of these ideas and also to promote them as mindful leaders and as role models that everybody can look up to and go, okay, these are the behaviours and these are our own Australian versions of Richard Branson, because these are people that are acting in ways that I want to emulate. So my book brings this all together in a fantastic format, very easy to read, and as you can hear, I'm very excited about it.
And you know what? Having read the book, it's a great book. Where can people buy it, Michele?
So it's available through my website, so they can go to www.michelegennoe, I'll spell that, MicheleGennoe.com.
Fantastic. And can they get the book anywhere else?
Not at this stage. It's going into Dymocks and other bookstores. It will be available on Amazon, but that won't be until much later in the year.
Wonderful. So it's Michele with one L, MicheleGennoe.com. And if anyone wants some more information, just send me an email at jane@janejacksoncoach.com. And now, what about your business, Michele? If someone wants to get in touch with you and find out more about mindful leadership coaching or be coached by you or have you come into their companies, how would they reach you?
Well, they can either reach me through the website that we've just described, or they can contact me at the office, and they can also contact me through the office email address, which is admin@michelegennoe.com.
Fantastic. And I am such a lucky lady to have had you on the show today, Michele. I'm really, really excited to hear all about everything that you've done. And I've learned something new about you as well. I didn't know about the chili thing, and I didn't know about BHP. Honestly, that's fantastic. You just don't realize about what other people's dreams would have been until you ask them and really probe. So for anyone listening in, if you want to find out more about careers that are potential career path for you, ask some questions of everyone. What you see on the surface, there's always so much more. And even though I know Michele very well and she's a wonderful friend, I learned something new today too. So thank you so much for coming on the show, Michele. And I hope to have you back again with some more stories and maybe a little bit more in-depth information about the Mindful Leadership book as well.
Fantastic, Jane. And thank you very much for the opportunity to be on your show today.
Oh, my pleasure. Okay, thanks so much, everybody. Bye.
You've been listening to Jane Jackson Careers. Sign up to receive regular career advice at janejacksoncoach.com.